All right, one more chance. As you joined, there was a poll on your screen. Please feel free to join, to do the poll. Thank you. And we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Center for Disaster Philanthropy webinar, How Funders Can Address the Growing Famine in Sudan. Last month, we addressed the longer-term Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my volume. Thank you. Last month, we addressed the longer-term hunger crisis in the U.S. Today, we are looking at the vast and increasing crisis of Sudan's famine, which also is a risk. There's also a risk of famine in many other parts of the world. In fact, this past week, there was a warning of pending famine in South Sudan. This webinar is being conducted in Arabic and in English, and translation is being provided for both. Click Interpretation in the bottom menu to access the translation channel. You can then select Arabic or English to tune in to the translation. To hear only the interpreted language, click Mute Original Audio. And my name is Tracy O'Hare. Salam alaikum, marhaba to our guests. I am the new program officer for international funds at the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. I use she, her pronouns. I started with CDP just last month, so I'm still learning, and this is my first webinar, so I hope everyone will go easy on me. I have been practicing a bit so that I don't have technical difficulties. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, here in the US, and although I'm currently joining you from the Washington, D.C. area, I've been working in disaster response since 2001. And I have worked for international NGOs, including Jesuit Refugee Service and Catholic Relief Services, as well as at USAID in the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance and later the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. My very first job in international response was in Sudan in 2001, in a part of the country that later became South Sudan. But since then, I've had the privilege of working alongside many Sudanese communities, including those in Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile, in Abyei, and in Khartoum on a variety of assignments. And so therefore, I'm really happy to be able to highlight how we can be a support to, how philanthropy can be a support to our Sudanese, to the Sudanese communities. And with that, just wanted to highlight that some of the beauty of Sudan before we get into the presentation. I have really always been so astounded and felt so welcome and at the hospitality that the Sudanese people have, and also have been so amazed by many parts of life along the Nile. And this picture included in this slide is a picture of the pyramids at Meroe, which is a royal burial place in Sudan that dates back to thousands of centuries ago. And I thought it would be interesting to share because not a lot of people know about them. It has been a privilege of mine to work alongside Sudanese people and friends and colleagues over the years, and I'm really glad to be able to lift up what philanthropy can do to support the Sudanese people today. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. In addition to Arabic and English translation, live captioning is available. Click on the closed caption live transcript button to access it, and these are available in multiple languages. We are recording this webinar. It may be available on our website and our YouTube channel later. When you leave the webinar, a short survey will pop up. Please complete it to help us improve our webinar offerings and better meet your needs. Finally, you can submit questions at any time in the webinar using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will try and answer them at the end of the panel presentation. A very big thank you to our sponsors of the webinar today: Alliance Magazine, Giving Compass, Peak Grantmaking, Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems Funders, and United Philanthropy Forum. Thank you to them. Their support enables us to reach a broader audience of funders. At this point, I'd like to pause for a land acknowledgement. As we begin the webinar, CDP acknowledges it works on the stolen lands of many original peoples. We recognize that Indigenous peoples have been displaced and disenfranchised from their land by the socioeconomic and cultural impacts of colonialism and disasters. The erasure of Indigenous knowledge about how to care for these lands has caused environmental destruction and degradation. CDP is committed to dismantling the ongoing legacies, systems, and structures of settler colonialism and white supremacy and their connections to philanthropy, today and in the future. Despite centuries of theft, violence, and murder, this is still and always will be Indigenous land. Please join us in acknowledging the original peoples and their elders and past, present, and future generations. All right, as we dive in, at the end of this webinar, we hope that you will learn more about the disproportionate impact of food insecurity on women and girls, on hunger on women and girls, explore how funders can reduce famine and hunger, and recognize the repercussions of governmental and philanthropic funding cuts. All right, we're going to take a minute to look at our survey results of our participants today. And the first question, to what extent are you aware of Sudan's hunger and famine crisis? So the most folks, more than half of our participants are aware, followed by fully aware. So we have a lot of very knowledgeable folks with us today, and hopefully that will allow us to dig in and get into some of the best ways that philanthropy can be engaged. What has your organization's response been in Sudan? About a little more than 40% are funding or responding now, so a little less than half. And then we have some others who are hoping to learn more, want to learn more to help plan and plan a response or funding, and some that are feeling that it may not be within their mandate, but are here to learn. So thanks all for answering the poll. Great. Start by talking about what is a famine. We want to define the term famine because it has a technical term. It is a technical term, and explain what it means. Action Against Hunger says a famine is defined as the most severe kind of hunger crisis. It is very rare, but when it occurs, it means that there is an extreme shortage of food, and several children and adults within a certain area are dying of hunger on a daily basis. Just to repeat that part, several children and adults within a certain area are dying of hunger on a daily basis. We'll discuss that more throughout the webinar. And we know that some disasters happen very quickly with no warning. It's not the case with famine. Famine happens slowly. It's caused by long-term conflict, climate shocks, extreme poverty, and other drivers. Famines are never inevitable. They are predictable, they are preventable, and they are man-made. A little bit more about famine. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, on your screen is the global standard for classifying acute food insecurity. The scale has 5 levels, with each one becoming progressively more severe. While level 5 is classified as a catastrophe or famine, we want to point out that level 3 and 4 still represent extreme suffering, and certainly, they still represent extreme suffering even at those levels. A catastrophe occurs at the household level and means that despite everything, the household still has an extreme lack of food and or other basic needs and is facing starvation, death, destitution, and extremely critical acute malnutrition levels. Famine happens at the area level and means 1 in 5 or 20% of households in the area have an extreme lack of food, face starvation and destitution, resulting in extremely critical levels of acute malnutrition and death. In this phase, the prevalence of acute malnutrition under 5 reaches or exceeds 30%, with at least 2 to 4 deaths per 10,000 people per day. In Sudan, approximately 100 people die daily just in Zamzam camp, which houses about 1% of Sudan's population. If this were happening in my city, Washington, D.C., that means that 138 to 276 people would die every day, or 50,370 to 100,000 would die every year from hunger. Since the IPC was established in 2004, there have only been 3 declarations of famine. In southern Somalia in 2011, in South Sudan in 2017, and the famine we're talking about today was declared last year in Sudan. Last week, the IPC announced that 83,000 people are at risk of famine in the next few months in South Sudan as well. So we'll move into introducing our guests. It is my honor to introduce them, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them. We'll start with Sean Hughes. Sean has been the World Food Programme's Regional Emergency Coordinator for the Sudan Crisis Response since March 2025. Since joining WFP in 2014, his roles have included Deputy Country Director for Operations in South Sudan, Senior Regional Emergencies Advisor for East Africa, Head of Food Systems and Resilience in Kenya, Head of Program in South Sudan, and Emergency Coordinator in Nigeria. Prior to joining WFP, Sean served 12 years as a humanitarian advisor with the UK government, undertaking positions and surge deployments across Africa and the Middle East. Welcome, Sean. Next, we have Federico Matka. Federico manages the Emergencies and Humanitarian Portfolio at the Vital Foundation. A longtime humanitarian aid worker, he has worked for several European international NGOs across a dozen countries in the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean, implementing responses to rapid onset natural disasters and complex crises. Since stepping back from direct implementation of aid responses in 2016, his work has focused on supporting efforts to drive more direct funding to national and subnational organizations, especially in contexts where the financial services sector has been actively de-risking. Welcome, Federico. Finally, Musab Swa El Dihab Sauti is the Programs and Humanitarians Interventions Coordinator at Adila. He leads emergency response efforts and local partnerships across Sudan. CDP is very pleased to have been able to provide 2 grants from our Sudan Humanitarian Recovery Fund to support Musab and his colleagues at Adila. Looking forward to hearing more about their work during the webinar. Welcome, Musab. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking your time, for giving your time to share your expertise with us. And with that, we'll start with the questions. Musab, I want to start with you. Please tell us what you see and hear on the ground in Sudan, especially regarding hunger and famine.
Thank you so much. I am really happy to be here with you today. My English is not very strong, so I will speak in Arabic. I hope this is okay. شكرا للفرصة. فيما يخص الوضع الحالي في السودان، الوضع الحالي في السودان ممكن أديكم لمحة بسيطة عنه فيما يتعلق بالمجاعة. ممكن نشوف إنه الوضع إنه بيتفوق على إنه وصف الكارثة، إنه في ملايين من الناس قاعد يواجهوا أزمة حقيقية بتاعت جوع ونزوح، وفقدوا مصادر دخلهم الأساسية ومنازلهم، حتى القدرة على الوصول للأسواق والمساعدات. آه، في الأزمة شغالة بشكل تصاعدي من بداية الحرب في 15 أبريل 2023 ولحد الآن. وبعد تصل لمعظم السودان، ممكن 80% من مناطق السودان وصلت للأزمة بتاعت الجوع، و- وقاعد تنمو بشكل تصاعدي كبير شديد. وفي نفس السياق بتاع الأزمة دي كانت بتعمل مبادرات مجتمعية في غرف الطوارئ، في إن تحويل التغليل بتاع الأزمة الإنسانية بتاعت الحد للناس اللي قاعدة في الأماكن بتاعت الصراع، في الأماكن اللي شهد الصراع. لكن برضه في تحديات كبيرة واجهتهم
Musab,
في إنه يقدر
can
ي-
sorry, Musab, can we stop for a second and make sure the interpreters are using the English channel, please? We're not getting translation right now. Yes, now we can.
أوكي أوكي. آه أوكي. آه الوضع الحالي في السودان ممكن نقول إنه وضع كارثي، وإنه في ملايين الناس بيواجهوا موضوع الجوع، وبرضه معظم الناس هم للأسف فقدوا منازلهم ومصادر دخلهم الأساسية، وحتى القدرة على الوصول للأسواق والمساعدات. الأزمة قاعدة تتنامى بشكل متصاعد من بداية الحرب في 15 أبريل 2023، وللأسف يعني استفقد جميع معظم ولايات السودان. في هذا السياق كانت في استجابة إنسانية واسعة من المجتمع السوداني عن طريق المنظمات الوطنية والفطوار في محاولة تقليل الأزمة بتاعت الجوع والتصاعد الكبير للمجاعة. على الأساس ده اتشكلت غرف طوارئ ومبادرات مجتمعية لمحاولة من التغليل بتاعت الأزمة، وتوفير بتاعت مطابخ جماعية، اللي هي الفكرة منها توفير الوجبات الغذائية للمجتمعات اللي ما عندها القدرة إنها توفر وجبة بسبب فقدانهم لمصادر دخلهم الأساسية، فقدانهم للوصول للأسواق. في نفس السياق الأماكن بتاعت الصراع الحركة فيها بتكون فيها شبه محدودة. ف المطابخ بدأت وعملت بشكل تصاعدي، لكن في أزمات كبيرة قاعدة تواجهها من بداية الحرب لحد الآن في تغطية الأزمة. يعمل جميع الفاعلون من مبادرات وغرف طوارئ ومنظمات وطنية في عملية الاحتواء بتاعت الأزمة، ولكن الأمور تخرج عن السيطرة بسبب الاتساع بتاع رقعة الحرب وعدم توفر الموارد الكافية لتغطية الحاجات الأساسية من الغذاء. نحاول مع جميع شركائنا من غرف الطوارئ والمبادرات الرائدية في محاولة حلحلة أو احتواء جزء من الأزمة الحالية، ولكن كما تعلمون أن الموارد محدودة، وهناك صعوبات حقيقية في الوصول لجميع مناطق الصراع. الأزمة متصاعدة ب- بش- الأزمة متصاعدة بشكل كبير، وحتى توجد منطقة معسكر زمزم في منطقة دارفور تم إعلان جاء من العام السابق. كما
We have
تواجه مناطق
lost.
أزمة الصراع، ونحاول قدر الإمكان تسليط الضوء على الأزمة ومحاولة حلها في أسرع وقت. شكراً.
Shukran, Musab. Thank you. Over to you, Sean. What is the World Food Program or other UN agencies doing in Sudan to support the overall crisis?
Thanks, Tracy, and good evening from Nairobi to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I mean, perhaps first just to emphasize the scale and severity as you did in the opening, this is the only country in the world where famine is confirmed, only the third famine this century. According to our latest data, 28 million people, or 64% of the population, are acutely food insecure, and 5 million women and children are acutely malnourished. In terms of response, therefore, WFP and the broader United Nations humanitarian community are trying desperately to scale up the level of assistance to be somewhere near commensurate with that level of need, knowing that we neither have the resources nor the capabilities to reach all those 28 million people that are food insecure. At the moment in WFP's operations, we're now reaching over 5 million people on a monthly basis with life-saving food and nutrition assistance, and that's a scale up of nearly 4 times since the conflict began. Our focus is very much on the 27 areas that have been classified as in famine already, or at risk of famine in the coming months, where we're assisting about 85% of the population in those areas. And the only way that we can do this is through partnerships. So we work very closely with national NGOs, Sudanese NGOs, the emergency response rooms, and we've heard from Musab the excellent work that they're doing, the Sudanese Red Crescent Society, to ensure broad coverage and access to those hard to reach areas. In addition to the direct delivery of assistance, WFP and the UN more broadly is responsible for sort of enabling the broader response. So from WFP's perspective, we also run the UN Humanitarian Air Service, UNHAS, which transports aid workers to where they need to be. We manage the logistics cluster, which offers common storage, joint transport solutions, including cross-border from Chad into Darfur. And telecommunications services for agencies that are operating in the deep field to ensure they have connectivity. And finally, perhaps one of the key roles of WFP and the UN is countrywide assessments. So WFP collects countrywide data on food security analysis and nutrition with UNICEF, etc. And that provides the analytical basis for donors and aid organizations in order to be able to channel their resources to where they're most needed. Obviously, there are huge challenges that we're facing in terms of humanitarian access, permission, if you like, from parties to the conflict to access areas where people are most in need, direct insecurity. You may be aware on the 2nd of June, we lost 5 colleagues in a convoy that was struck with an aerial attack on its way to Al-Fasher in North Darfur. We face logistical challenges, long distances, some weak infrastructure, bridges that get washed out by rains or destroyed by conflict, meaning we need to pre-position ahead of the rainy season. And of course, resourcing is increasingly a huge challenge.
Thanks, Sean. Now we'll turn to Federico. Federico, why has Vital chosen to include Sudan in its grant making, and what areas do you prioritize?
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks everyone for having me on. It's great to be with you, and good evening from London. Yeah, look, so I mean, my portfolio mandate is humanitarian and emergency, so there's a dual basis for our engagement in Sudan. In the very, very early moments when the conflict started, the emergency we have a particular funding ability that allows us to do emergency grant making, which is super simple and relatively fast. And we were lucky enough to have a series of partners in the peace building world that we were able to operate through, and who knew had been working on a framework for supporting communities in crisis, that also known as survivor community-led response, that we had been using and been supporting, in other sort of contexts of particular crisis and conflict. So sort of we had an ability to sort of get funding out rapidly, and we did that. And then sort of alongside that, we started to sort of understand how during that period to see how the conflict was evolving, and sort of felt that also thanks to the fact that we have a relatively global staff. I mean, we are a corporate foundation, so the corporate parent has offices around the world, and a lot of staff reached out to us to sort of say, look, how can we do more? By middle of 2024, I had seen a model from through a friend of a friend that sort of started talking about the potential for up to about 1.3 million people to die from famine conditions, and there was different modeling that looked at different BMIs and linked it to mortality, to excess mortality, that really actually was potentially looking at a double-digit figure of excess mortality. So in addition to what would normally, the normal aging and process, essentially, in addition to all of that would die. So we really felt like this isn't a crisis that we could ignore. And number one, and number two, sort of by mandate, we look to continue engagement as long as we can in contexts that we consider to be underfunded or overlooked in the global psyche, let's say. And yeah, unfortunately, Sudan has sort of met both those conditions for various reasons, pretty much since the beginning, since the first media wave passed when the conflict broke out.
Thanks. For sure, among one of the crises that is not getting the attention related to the severity of the situation. Musab, over to you. Can you tell us about the work of the community kitchens and the emergency response rooms, and tell us more about what is Adila's role?
أوكي. قبل البداية ممكن نتحدث عن المطابخ. ممكن المطابخ دي عبارة عن حاجات عائلية تمت شعبية في الأحياء بشكل عفوي، مستلهمة من ثقافة النفير الشعبية وثقافة العمل التضامني. الفكرة بتاعت المطابخ المجتمعية ببساطة هي إن المجتمعات نفسها بيقوم بإعداد وجبات جماعية لسكان المنطقة، وتوفير الغذاء الأساسي اللي بيعتمد على السكان بشكل أساسي في الغذاء. وصلت أعداد المطابخ التي تديرها غرف الطوارئ السودان من بداية الحرب الآن أكثر من 200 مطبخ. تقوم المطابخ في بعض الأوقات بإعداد وجبتين في اليوم، وتكتفي أحيانا بإعداد وجبة واحدة لسكان الحي، وتعتمد على توفر الموارد الخاصة بالإدارة بتاعت المطبخ. وصل أعداد المستفيدين المباشرين من المطابخ في كل السودان التي تديرها غرف الطوارئ حوالي 3 مليون مستفيد بشكل مباشر من كل السودان. تقوم عديلة بالشراكة والتنسيق مع الغرف في تقديم المنح المرنة التي تساعد المطابخ في الاستمرارية وتوفير الموارد لتوفير الغذاء للمواطنين. كما تواصل العديلة بجهودها بتاعت للتنسيق بشأن المناصرة بسبب توقف معظم المطابخ، حوالي 80% من المطابخ في الفترة السابقة بسبب توقف المن بسبب توقف الدعم، وخاصة توقف الدعم الخاص ب USAID. فتواصل عديلة في جهودها في المناصرة وتسليط الضوء على عمل المطابخ.
Thank you. I hope everyone is hearing okay. I think there's been a little bit of technical difficulty with the sound with the translation, but onwards and upwards. And thank you for telling us more about your work. Federico, can you tell us some of the specific grants you've made and what you see happening?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, sort of part of our approach to how we look at localization and how we can support local actors on the ground has been to recognize that the first and last responders tend to be community members themselves, and sort of looking at some of the lessons that we've seen from other crises around the world, and funding that we were able to get into those crises, we recognized that, with the international system to some degree sort of sidelined to Port Sudan for security and access reasons, we really needed to sort of identify new ways of getting funds to the ground. And the work of one of our partners early on in the conflict, which was this concept of Rushash, was built on the Sudanese notion of nafir, community solidarity, mutual solidarity, and that sort of taps in and is enormously powerful when it's able to sort of when it has the space to sort of flourish, essentially. We were lucky to have the right connections to be able to sort of understand how those efforts were mobilizing in Khartoum initially, with the Khartoum CERR starting, but then also in Darfur and the rest of the country. Not all mutual aid or mutual solidarity efforts are the same, and sort of what was interesting for us was to basically to find ways to sort of not just support them, but also recognize how we could enable them to sort of coordinate and work across what is ultimately an enormous landmass, right, country. So our grants sort of initially were very much around sort of testing. I'll admit, we have a risk tolerance in our mandate, and we're looking for ways to sort of address structural issues to how funding flows into crises. And so we really wanted to take advantage of that. So we were able to work with a variety of partners, some who had worked in the peace building fields, and were extremely well networked as a result. Something that unfortunately in the humanitarian sector, due to sort of the competitive nature of resourcing, isn't always the case. I mean, it can be, but not always. But also we were able to sort of work with partners who had worked in activist networks, looking at supporting youths when they were protesting the Bashir government before the conflict broke out, before its fall even of that government. And yeah, and we were able to sort of test different mechanisms, sort of see what could be as responsive as possible to the ground, and allow the ERRs to make their own decisions in how that money was spent. And so again, this survivor community-led response framework, it's a tool essentially. It's like imagine it as a scaffolding that allows us to sort of meet compliance requirements, for lack of a better word, towards and our fiduciary responsibilities, but to do so in a manner that doesn't impose too much of a structure on what is essentially a very organic, highly dynamic mode of organizing that is built off of this incredible sort of capacity that Sudanese people and people around the world, frankly, have, and that we sort of tend to ignore a little bit and sort of, or at least overlook or establish sort of mechanisms that to some degree snuffs it out, right? And it creates a dependency or an incentive to sort of wait and see. So our priority had been very much sort of how do we support this, give them the flexibility and the safe to fail kind of funding that would enable them to do what they feel is necessary, and whilst we sort of wait and see how the international system can organize around it. And that's sort of pretty much what we've seen evolve since sort of late 2023.
Thank you. So building out a model that's focused on as much community leadership as possible and going from there. Sean, over to you. Given the recent funding cuts, how does WFP see the humanitarian ecosystem evolving?
Well, it's evolving before our very eyes. I think even today, Tracy, the Interagency Standing Committee was meeting in Geneva on what's now known as the humanitarian reset. So a lot is changing. A lot is changing at pace. I think it's worth noting that there's immense resource pressure right across the humanitarian spectrum. It's not just Sudan, and it's not just U.S. funding cuts. There are many traditional donors, if you like, that are sort of pulling back. And actually, what we're seeing within that, particularly with regard to Sudan, is a continued commitment to Sudan. It does, while often being thought of as an underreported crisis, it's perhaps not as underreported as some others, and it still resonates with many funders. A few things, maybe just to start with the funding models, which are changing and are going to have to change. So your traditional humanitarian financing model is very top down. A traditional donor, normally a Western government, provides a large chunk of money to a large UN agency or international NGO, who in turn provides sort of oversight, logistical support, proposal, financial management, and partners, and operates with NGOs. So it's sort of a very top-down sort of process. And I think what we're seeing, and probably and hopefully, while it is painful for many parts of the system, is a positive shift to a more inclusive, a more diverse, and a more bottom-up approach to how humanitarian assistance is resourced. So now I think it's beholden on organizations like WFP, the United Nations, some of the larger NGOs and others to find a way in this role where it's where you may be looking at blended models of financing with philanthropy, with non-traditional donors, with diaspora, with communities, where you may not be solely responsible for the full delivery, and you're more of an enabler in that space. And that's positive, but as I said, it's still a steep learning curve. A couple of other things. I think increased prioritization. It's been happening for years, but if we're going to meet the most acute needs, which are often in the hardest to reach places, we need to, within cuts and downsizing, etc., both preserve but also innovate within the assessment space, because without the data upon which to base the resource allocation decisions, we're all going to be a little bit lost. So there's a lot to be done in that assessment and prioritization and targeting space. I'd like to see a bigger focus on integration. We know that, for example, food assistance alone will not stop a famine. Children will generally die by measles and cholera before the lack of food. And therefore, if the food assistance is not delivered alongside the water and sanitation and the healthcare and the protection and the shelter in context of displacement, it does not add up to an effective response. And in order to maximize the efficiency of the resources that we do have, integration is important. And maybe finally, I think a lot's being said globally about the untapped potential of cash transfers as a default modality, in terms of the dignity and choice that it provides, and the potential support for private sector, particularly where markets are operational. So there's a lot changing, and a lot to think about, and a lot to get through.
Thank you, Sean. We have about 18 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to pick some of the best ones so we can make sure that our participants get the best information possible. Musab, we've talked about local organizations as they relate to WFP and others. From your perspective, why should funders look at local organizations to solve such this issue, such as this issue in Sudan?
شكرا. أعتقد من واقع التجربة إنه المنظمات المحلية هي الأقرب للمجتمع والأسرع في الاستجابة والأكثر فهما للسياق الثقافي والسياسي والاجتماعي. برضو شايف إنه المفروض يتم دعم المنظمات الوطنية بالترسيخ مبدأ توطين المساعدات، بالإضافة لأنه معظم المنح التي عبر المنظمات الوطنية بتسحب المستفيدين مباشرة دون رسوم إدارية وتشغيلية، وبيخلي عدد المستفيدين يكون أكبر، وإنه القروض تصل بشكل أسرع بدون البيروقراطية الطويلة. شكرا.
Thank you. Shukran. Federico, some funders are hesitant to fund in conflict zones or don't know how to tackle that issue because it's how to tackle that or to tackle a big issue like famine. As a fellow funder, what would you like to tell colleagues to encourage them to get involved?
Two messages really. One is it is not that difficult necessarily to get funds into some of these contexts. I know it's sort of can seem daunting, but there are a lot of different mechanisms at our disposal, depending on our risk appetite, our kind of compliance requirements, and other sort of board related or constituent related demands. I mean, I think the number one thing is in terms of what to fund to, I guess, within Sudan. My advice would be just let the Sudanese decide. I mean, they've demonstrated over 2 years now and more. It's getting beyond 2 years soon that that they're capable. They've set up incredible coordination mechanisms. I mean, in incredibly difficult circumstances, we're against the odds with a lot of support from the diaspora community. We have to acknowledge the fact that it hasn't been the international system or philanthropy or whatever that's actually enabled this to happen. It's been Sudanese diaspora from around the world that has stepped up for their communities at home. So, I think there's a lot of evidence that is pointing towards how we can follow suit. And I think there are different coalitions out there, different vehicles that offer different sort of assurances and support, and that includes the UN and the INGO community. But our call has always been to sort of fund as directly as possible. The money is needed on the ground, so we emphasize working through mechanisms that sort of have the lowest administrative costs and the most direct funding pathways, and those exist. They've been proven, and some, in fact, even sort of completely hand over decision making to the coordination bodies like the local coordination council that the ERRs have pulled together to get alongside partners like Adila and other INGOs.
Thank you. So we have an ability to do question and answers. So if folks have questions, if participants have questions, we can pick those out from the Q&A box. Feel free to enter them there. Many of the ones that have already been entered kind of overlap with questions that we received in advance of the webinar. So I'm going to ask one or two of those while questions come in. Musab, we know from our other webinars on hunger and issues of famine that often women and girls bear the brunt of the impact. They have the least access to food and meals in these types of situations. How do ERRs work to address that discrepancy?
Just gonna come in from the background for a second to make sure. Ahmed, can you please translate on the English channel? Rima, can you please translate on the Arabic channel? Just so that we can hear everybody. Thank you. Go ahead.
ساكيو اهتمت غرف الطوارئ بالأطفال والنساء منذ بداياتها، وحرصت في البداية على إنشاء غرف طوارئ نسوية تقوم الغرف بتوفير مساحات آمنة للأطفال يكون فيها هذه المساحات تجهيز وجبات أساسية، حتى تقوم بتوفير الغذاء، حتى وتوفير خدمات التعليم البديل. اهتمت غرف الطوارئ بالنساء، خاصة النساء الحوامل في ظل الحصار، قامت بتوفير حقائب أساسية توفر فيها الغذاء المناسب للنساء الحوامل، وتوفير الاحتياجات الأساسية من قوى صحية وما إلى ذلك. ساعدت هذه الاهتمامات من غرفة الطوارئ المساواة في توفير الخدمات النسائية بين الأطفال والنساء وجميع المتواجدين في منطقة الصراع.
Thank you, Musab. Sean, could you speak to how WFP also looks at this issue and works to include women and girls in its responses?
Sure. Thanks very much, Tracy. Musab. Yeah, I mean, we know, not only do women and girls eat least and last, but they're also responsible for most aspects of household food security and nutrition, from breastfeeding to water and firewood collection to growing food, preparing food, cooking food, etc. So, the engagement is essential for any effective programming. In WFP, I mean, there's a number of mechanisms, systems that have been developed, over years, to ensure that engagement is there. We work through food assistance committees, local committees, and we encourage and ensure that the membership of those is representative. In times that needs to be negotiated with communities, even with separate discussion groups. I mean, I think sort of worth noting here, as we know, we're often working within certain societal norms, patriarchal norms, etc., which require some sensitivity. In our monitoring systems, the data collected is ensured to be collected from women, and that data is disaggregated. So when you're asking in terms of how many different kinds of food have you eaten in the last week or in the last month to come, or how many meals you've had, or what the coping strategies are that you're employing, you make sure that that doesn't come from one section of society or only men. Those questions are disaggregated and differentiated so that we can pick up on exactly how food insecurity is impacting women and girls. There are community feedback mechanisms established, so hotlines, help desks, etc. People can report issues of exclusion, challenges with receiving assistance, for example, distances that may be unacceptable for people to travel to receive assistance. And obviously, you've got very specific programs that are targeted at women and girls. So nutrition programming, for example, specifically assisting pregnant breastfeeding women and children, and not only providing that assistance directly, but also looking at the referral pathways from that assistance to other forms of healthcare, other forms of food security assistance as is required. And of course, school meals, even they tend to be one of the first things that gets dropped in times of crisis, particularly when schools stop functioning, etc. But where at all possible, keeping kids in school, keeping girls in school, and ensuring not only are they attending and therefore subject to less risk in terms of early marriage or conscription into armed groups, but also that they have the cognitive ability to be able to learn and therefore deliver to their full potential in future, despite the disruptions that are happening in their lives.
Thank you, Sean. One or two more questions to go here. I have one that came in, and then I'm going to go to one in the Q&A. Federico, can you tell the audience more about the Coalition for Mutual Aid in Sudan? How has the response been, and are new donors continuing to join?
Thanks. Yeah, good question. So the Coalition for Mutual Aid in Sudan is essentially an effort by a number of philanthropic funders who have supported Sudan and who wanted to continue to support Sudan to sort of send out a bat signal, if you will, into the world to say, look, we're doing it. We're an aligned set of funders who want to sort of speak more and create visibility around how we're doing it so that others can come alongside. Or we're not ramming anything down anyone's throats. There are different mechanisms. Everyone has done different things to get funding towards these sort of hyper-local efforts at mutual aid and mutual assistance. The reality is that there was a sort of wave of engagement back in September last year. We managed to do quite a bit of work and get sort of a bit of traction. We were hoping to reach our sort of $6 million target of funds raised instead of in 2 years, in 1 year. But I think, given the scale of the needs, we should be much more ambitious, and I think we need to step up. And so, yeah, definitely would encourage anyone who's interested in supporting and sort of piggybacking to some degree off of the homework of others, to get in touch through CDP or through I think yes, CGI. There was a call to action, a commitment to action, sorry, launched at the Clinton Global Initiative last year. There's information on both those sites about the coalition. And maybe can I just take 1 minute to sort of say, look, the mutual aid is not a silver bullet solution. So, I think there was a comment in one or a comment / questions in one of the submitted that sort of recognizes the important role of international NGOs. I am by no means saying that INGOs are irrelevant or anything like that. I mean, we have to just realize that what the latest humanitarian systems report from for 2024 came out, and it's like 4.6% of funding goes to national or subnational organizations. And we also have to recognize that the humanitarian system has tended and is changing, but has tended to create systems that essentially like work in parallel to local capacities. So the only thing that we're saying by sort of speaking out about the potential and reality of mutual aid in Sudan is that it has been the tool that has stopped a humanitarian situation from becoming significantly worse. It's our responsibility collectively to work around them, support them, ensure that they have the space to operate. And INGOs and the United Nations and WFP will support that and are incredibly important to do so. I mean, at the end of the day, famine is required. I mean, when famine occurs, you need to treat malnourished populations, and the treatment protocols are not simple. They require sort of certain standards and systematic approaches that can be enabled by the international system. But we just have to recall that like the reality is that the people on the ground are the first and last, and including particularly women. And since they are the ones who don't get to walk away when security conditions or whatever gets or aid gets weaponized, they can deliver and they will. And if you give them the support that they need. So yeah, it's a community effort for sure.
Thanks, Federico. I think for our last question, first I want to say thanks to everyone for your patience with the translation issues that we've had, but I wanted to ask Musab if you could speak to how communities are starting to work on recovery and if that's even a stage that folks are thinking about at this point, and what recovery looks like on the ground for Sudanese communities.
Sorry, please again the question.
Um, I wanted to ask as a closing question, if you could talk a little bit about how Sudanese communities are looking at recovery and resilience moving forward. How communities are looking at building ahead and kind of moving out of the disaster response phase, or is that's even a possibility? What folks are thinking about at this point.
شكرا. في البداية الحرب ممكن من ناحية سلبية حاولت إنه فرقت النسيج الاجتماعي بتاع السودانيين، وخلت إنه لحم التعريبات صارت في المسيرة السودانية ما قاعدة زي ما كانت أول، لكن ممكن عشان نوصل لمرحلة التعافي ونقدر نتخطى الأزمة دي. هي الفكرة الأساسية إنه في البداية إنه نوقف الحرب اللي بسببها حصلت المجاعة والتشرد والفقد الأساسي بتاع مصدر الأكل والأماكن والمنازل بتاعت السودانيين. ثم بعد ذلك إنه نقدر نوفر الخدمات الأساسية اللي هي من غذاء ومياه وكهرباء للسكان. ونفكر بعد ذلك إنه كيف نحاول نحن كسودانيين نحاول الفكرة بتاعت إعمار السودان ومحاولة خلق بيئة اقتصادية جاذبة تاني، إنه خلق سوق عمل للناس اللي فقدوا وظائفهم وفقد مصادر دخلهم خلال الحرب. أظن لي دي العوامل اللي بتساعدنا إنه نقدر نتوقف الحرب دي وتكون آخر حرب في السودان وتكون آخر أزمة مجاعة في السودان. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I really want to thank everyone for your time and patience today with some of our technical difficulties, but thank you also for engaging in this conversation. That's all the time we have for our discussion. And I just want to thank our panel for the great discussion. And I want to highlight that it's actually quite late in the evening where they are. So thank you also for taking away from your evening to be a part of this conversation. I want to provide the audience with some actionable thoughts from our conversation. As our speakers have highlighted, this crisis is happening now. Governments and funders have reduced financial support. The humanitarian sector is greatly reduced in terms of resources. For Sudan, that means that people are not getting assistance and people are dying. Statistics show that at least 100 people have died in the crisis areas of Sudan since we started this webinar an hour ago. Also, women and girls eat last. They spend much of their time collecting firewood and water, tending to livestock and crops, and making food for their families. This reduces young girls' abilities to attend school and often leads to childhood marriage, and maternal health is also affected. Programs to support feeding should also address the unique needs of women and children. And finally, I would like to take us back to a statement from our friends at Action Against Hunger that I shared at the beginning. Famines are never inevitable. They are always predictable, preventable, and man-made. That means for those of us who are funders, there are actions we can take before more regions move into famine stage to prevent that from happening. CDP recently updated its issue insight on hunger, which includes advice for donors, and I encourage you all to check it out. This webinar is just one of CDP's many education and knowledge offerings. We provide weekly disaster updates, comprehensive disaster profiles, and issue insights covering the US and international disaster topics. We also have special research reports relevant to disaster philanthropy. Our expert advisory service team can partner with donors to seek customized assistance with disaster giving strategies. And beyond our expert resources, visit our website to learn about our collaborative funds, including our Sudan Humanitarian Crisis Fund, which supports community kitchens, emergency response rooms, and other mutual aid in Sudan. Finally, please join United Way Worldwide, National VOED, and CDP next Tuesday for a national community building preparing for the 2025 summer disaster season webinar. You can register that link at that link in the chat or go to www.nvoed.org. CDP's next scheduled webinar is on September 11th. Of course, we will stand up another one if anything is needed over the summer, if anything emerges. That's all we have time for today. Thank you very much to our co-sponsors and to Sean, Musab, and Federico for sharing their insights with us. Please take a moment to complete the post-webinar survey to let us know what you liked and what you would like to see in future webinars. If you have any questions or thoughts that were not addressed during today's webinar, you may email them to Tanya@webinars@disasterphilanthropy.org. Thank you and have a great day.